Starting in verse 22, immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. You guys join with me. And those in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." You guys can be seated.
God, thank you for being with us. God, we see the way you provide through the rain, and we also see the way that you just are a source of joy. Even during that activity we did there, just seeing people smiling and connections being made over silly things like, do you own rollerblades or are you taller than me? We're thankful that you find a way to work in the simple things and not just the complex, that you are with us in our storm, but you're with us on sunny days as well. We love you. If I could have you guys all say it with me at the very end, we'll all say amen. 1, 2, 3. Amen. Very cool. Hey, well, we're in week 3 of our series, Fear Not. And we started week 1 just talking about how there's a such thing as like fear that's like healthy, that like maybe, if you're walking near a ledge or a busy street or something, that there's this like emotion that fills you that maybe keeps you safe, kind of like pain. Pain is something that I'm glad that when my hand is on a stove, that I feel pain and it sends signals that says, get your hand off the stove. Don't ask if that's ever really happened. But I'm glad that we have these things that God gave us. But there's another type of fear that's deeper, and it's the type of fear that we live with. It's the type of fear that we carry with us like a backpack just full of bricks that keeps us from doing things that maybe we know we need to do, whether it's a relationship sort of thing, a conversation we need to have, or whether it's just taking a risk. Fear is something that can be a good thing, but there's a fear that we're talking about, the fear that over and over and over again in Scripture, Jesus, God, are saying to us, fear not. And the answer they always give after that, or seem to give, is fear not. Not because you have what it takes, not because fear is like some myth and it's just fake news and it's all in your imagination, but fear not because I'm with you. That this idea that God is with us should change the way that we see the world and that we approach fear and things we're afraid of. Week 2, we talked about a fear to lead. And here's the reality. Everybody wants to be led by a fearless leader, whether it's in the home or whether it's in the workplace or whether it's just when we go to a restaurant and we want the people that are leading the restaurant that we're eating at to be great leaders, to be responsible, to be equitable to people and kind. And a lot of us have hurts from leaders who have been people pleasers, and they chose not to please us. They chose to please somebody else with the decisions they made. Scared or insecure leaders. We all want to be led by or be around or have our kids grow up to be fearless leaders. But rarely do we truly want to do what it takes to become fearless leaders ourselves. So we talked about that, and we ended with this idea that there's people that lead other leaders. There's people that lead other people. But that we're all called, that every one of us is responsible. And the society that we want to be a part of, and a church that we want to be a part of, and a family we want to be a part of, has people that take seriously the idea of leading ourselves well. And leading ourselves has to do with knowing ourselves and taking risks to grow. Now, today, that leads perfectly into what we're doing, because today is called Fear to Grow. And I don't know if you guys, we had that on the bingo card, right? The idea of some people like to go to the gym. Did everybody go to you? Did like everybody go to you because of that, what I did there? It's okay. If you wore a sleeveless shirt today, it probably would have helped. Just walk around, just do some push-ups, walk around with a pump. That's what church is for, totally. The pastor said it. It's true. But like there's this saying, and me and a friend were talking about it beforehand. There's this saying that came out, I think it was from the baby boomer generation. No pain, no what? No gain. No pain, no gain. It rhymes, so it must be true, right? It was on, I remember like really early, even in my dad's, like our garage growing up out there, it was like the one thing that was like on the wall forever. And it was like this, like you couldn't see the person's face, but they were like doing a bicep curl, and it was like taking up like the whole, no pain, no gain. The whole idea of it is this idea that if you really want to grow in the fitness world, if you really want to grow, there's going to be some work you have to do. That work and that pain, that discomfort could be eating healthy. It could be getting up early. Or the worst one, going to bed early. It could be different things that you say no to. It could be things that you say yes to. But in order to find growth, if I want this growth, whether it's like this bicep curl sort of picture that you see, or I just want to feel better, it takes some discomfort. Now, I'm okay with that saying, but I think it needs some clarification. Because in my life, after living on this earth for several rotations, I've learned that there's two kinds of pain. And maybe you've seen this too. There's the kind of pain that can lead you to growth. The kind of pain that like is stretching you. The kind of like discomfort that is, I've got to get out of my comfort zone. I've got to learn something new, right? And then there's the kind of pain that leads to injury. The kind of pain that leads to hurt. The kind of pain where if I keep pushing myself here, if I stay at this job, if I stay in this relationship, if I keep doing what I'm doing, then I could be hurt for a long time. And usually we don't see that. And usually when someone says no pain, no gain, they're not saying you've got to injure yourself if you want to gain that. They're talking about the first kind of pain that leads to growth, stretching. Because truly you can't grow unless you get out of your comfort zone. Nothing great, nothing exciting ever happens in the comfort zone. I think there's kind of a belief that we've allowed to trickle into at least American culture that says, if I just wait, opportunity will come to me. Like, I don't even need to put my pole in the water. The fish will just eventually, if I just wait, they will just jump into my boat kind of thing. But today, I think that there are some times that we want to avoid. We want to avoid the injury, and we end up avoiding both, the growth as well. And sometimes we go so hard at the growth, we don't even realize that we're actually hurting ourselves. But I think God has called us to grow. God has called us, and actually every single day we have opportunities, multiple opportunities to grow. Today, when you were playing church bingo with us, that was a growth moment. That could have been a moment where you're like, all right, let's see how this goes. Let's see. Pastor said it. I know where the door is if I need to get out of here fast. Or I can just go get coffee. Or bathroom break is a great way to get out of a difficult moment because nobody's going to say, no, you don't. You don't have to go to the bathroom. But 100% of the opportunities that we have in our life to grow will require a level of discomfort. 100% of them. When we leave here today, there will be opportunities for growth, but there are also moments that could lead to hurt or injury that we have to be careful of. And whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, I believe that every one of us in here, at some point, no matter what you're going through in your life, no matter how much weight you're carrying right now, no matter how much responsibility you've got, there is a desire in you to grow. And I don't mean like one area. I'm being purposely generic right now. Because whether it's at school, whether it's at home, there are frustrations we have. There are moments that when we are sitting there going, this can't be the same a year from now. I want this to be different. I want this to change. And that starts very early. And sometimes there's a level of discomfort or there's a level of just not being satisfied. That could be selfishness. But for the most part, I think all of us have in us this desire to say, a year from now, I want to be better at this. Now, if you're a Christ follower, if you're someone who follows after Jesus, you call yourself maybe a Christian. Christian actually means Christ-like. So in order for us to grow, we have this great way, this great plan. When Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, it was because his disciples, his followers, were asking the same when we do. What's the way? How do I do this? And when he said, I'm the way, and when later, hundreds of years later, when Jesus followers started calling themselves Christians, it was this idea that our way that we live is how can I be more like Christ? There are other people and there are other ways that we try and follow. I want to be more like this person. At work, I want to be more like this person. At home, I want to be more like this person. But when it comes to the pinnacle of what growth is for a Christ follower, it's I want to be more like Jesus. That's why every week when we open this book, when we read, it's what is another way that we can be more like Jesus? Not be more churchy, not be more, church points, heaven points, however we want to call it, depending on what your background is. Those are not real things, by the way. But we're asking ourselves, Jesus, what can we learn about you so that I will not miss opportunities to grow? And if you're not a Christ follower today, I believe that all of this will apply to you. But we're going to get to the very end and realize that the only way we can really live without fear is knowing that God is with us. In this passage Kurt just read, Jesus, I kind of read the beginning, and as I was studying this, I was like, it kind of sounds like a great vacation. Jesus and the disciples are hanging out on the beach of this lake, and two things happen. Jesus says, you guys go on the boat, which sounds like vacation, and he says, I'm going to go for a hike in the mountains by myself. It just sounds like a vacation, but it's not. They're able to enjoy life. Jesus is going away to pray. They're actually just trying to get back to where they're going, that it was way longer and harder to walk around the lake to get home to where they live, to where they keep their boat, to do that. So they were cutting across the lake. Jesus was going to the mountains. I don't know if they were thinking, should we question him? Do you have another boat? Are you just going to try and find some other way to get back? Matthew doesn't record that. All he records is that Jesus immediately sent them to go back. He said, don't wait for me. Guys, don't wait up. I think that we see Jesus' introversion here of hey, you know what, guys? You're great and all. Don't ask questions. I just need a break. I'm going to go to the mountains, which is a beautiful thing we can relate to. But there's another thing we can relate to in this story, and that is that the disciples did not check the weather app. They did not look and see that there were storms a-brewing. I should have said that more like a pirate, right? There was a storm a-brewing. There was something happening out on the water. And living where we live and seeing the rain that we've seen, we can understand how quickly weather changes when you're near the mountains. That the way that the winds and weather patterns hit the Front Range, it can change like that. And the disciples, at least the closest followers of Jesus, they're out on this boat in the middle of the lake. They left after dinner time, and they're still out there in this storm. And so I've got a couple of observations for us here. The first one is we have to realize how long they were out there. They were out on that water for a long time. I'm going to read it here in verse 23. When Jesus came, or when evening came, Jesus was there alone. But the boat, by this time, was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves. I feel like that's such a descriptive word, not just rocked by the waves, but beaten by the waves, right? For the wind was against them. And if you don't know, if you've ever biked, biking is great unless there's wind. I'd rather be crawling than biking when there's wind against them. Verse 25, and in the fourth watch of the night, remember that, fourth watch of the night, Jesus came to them walking on the sea. Now, this idea of the fourth watch is an old term that actually, the way that they were colonized by the Romans had overtaken them. So a lot of Roman traditions were things that they went by, especially Matthew, who worked with the Romans at one point as he wrote this. The fourth watch of the night was the last of all the sections that the Romans divided the night into. And there were different religious reasons and cultural reasons they did that. But here's what they were. The first watch was between 6 and 9 p.m. The second watch, phase 2, was 9 to 12. The third watch was 12 to 3. And then the fourth watch, which is what they said the disciples were still out there, was between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. So if they left before evening, because Matthew told us that they were out on the water still during the fourth watch, we can conjecture that they left before evening. That their thought was, hey, we're going to get back in time for dinner, or we're going to get back in time to be able to get the boat up there and get home when it's not so dark outside. So they've been out there for hours. And like, I love being on a boat, and I actually was talking to a friend how I really love like struggle. Sometimes overcoming a struggle is like really fun, like it's an adventure for me. But every one of us has a threshold of annoyance and fear and struggle. Examples. Love our dog. Didn't put a picture up because you would only be thinking about that dog the rest of the time because it is the best dog ever. We love Tate. But there are times when Tate is barking at people. We live like right on the Ralston Creek Trail. So like we've got bikes and walkers and other inferior canines walking by all day long. And when Tate starts barking, I'm trying to work, Becky's trying to work, the kids are trying to summer, you know, and the dog barks a couple times, we're okay with it. We're just like, but the fourth or fifth time or 10 minutes straight, I am looking up online foster dog places that I can rehome my dog, right? Like everyone has a threshold. I think for some of us, like when our food is late at a restaurant, like I think we're all pretty patient people, especially if you've worked in food service or you've worked in service before. You're pretty patient, but there comes a point when you're like, okay, we're starving. Like, this is longer than we ever planned to be here. Do we really have to pay for this now? Could we leave? Will that embarrass my wife if we leave? But I think the one that we all have a threshold for, especially where we live now, is like how much snow we're willing to deal with per winter, right? Like, I don't know, are we good for the video? Yeah, so Charlie Barron's on YouTube says it really well.
It's amazing. Just in time for Christmas. Snow angels for Jesus. It's snowing.
Yes. So it's a short, it's only 11 seconds. So you want to watch it 15 times, we have time for it. But like snow is one of those where we all have this threshold. And some of us, because of snow in March, are ruined in December. It gets out and we're like, oh crap. Or what is the old meme, like brace yourselves, winter is coming. I mean, there's a certain threshold we have. And sometimes there's things that time does not help with. We just have to get through it, or we just have to deal with it. Or there's an old saying that I heard a lot in the South. I still hear it all the time. It is what it is, which just means like complaining will not help. We just have to do something about it, right? But the disciples have been out there for hours and hours and hours, and they've been struggling. And it says that the waves were beating on the boat. I believe that they had reached their threshold. This was not fun anymore. It was not, the fellowship was not great. It was, we need to figure out a way to get out of this. Is there a way out of this? There's that moment when it comes to fear where we kind of feel like we have some control. This is going to take longer. This is going to be expensive. But there's that moment, especially if you're a parent and you don't know where one of your kids is at, where at first you're like, okay, you go down that aisle, I'll say their name, not very loud yet. I don't want people to know I lost my kid yet. But there's that moment, and if you're a parent, it's happened, or a dog parent, it's happened, where all of a sudden you're in a place where you're like, I'm not going to whisper their name anymore. I am going to tell every employee in this store what my kid looks like. I'm texting people to pray, and I'm shouting their first, middle, and last name for the whole store to hear. There's a switch that I believe was about to be clicked or had been for them, which leads us to observation number 2. In the hour of their greatest need, Jesus came to them. In the hour of their greatest need, Jesus came to them. A lot of times we think, I'm in trouble, I need to go to Jesus. And that is an option. I go to prayer, I go to the Word. But the disciples were scared, and Jesus came to them. In fact, they were so scared that Matthew doesn't just say they were scared, he gives kind of a description. He's talking about himself here, so I appreciate his honesty. In verse 26, it says, when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. And he could have stopped there because I think we all have imaginations to understand terrified. But he actually says a little more. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. I think that you've hit your threshold when you start saying it's a ghost and you're crying out in fear. Think of the last time you were so afraid about something that you were crying out for help. I think of moments where, even when someone's backing up a car, and instead of me just waving, they're getting closer and I start to yell or I start to honk the horn. I'm thinking when my son or the dog are getting close to the road and there's cars coming and I don't think they see it, that all of a sudden, I am crying out in fear because in my head, I've seen the future of what could happen if I don't say something. The disciples are so terrified. They've reached that point where they are crying out in fear, and they're even saying it's a ghost, which we have to kind of numb some of the things that we know about the Bible, about Scripture, and the very televised version of ghosts that we have. We have a very televised version where it's either it's this zombie that's in the last thing they were wearing before they died or something that kind of walks through walls and Scrooge, you know what I'm talking about? Jacob Marley. Or it's Casper, or it's a kid whose parents didn't want to buy him a gift or a costume for Halloween. So what do? Here's the sheet. Cut some holes in it, right? We have a very televised version. This was a complete superstition they had. That one of the Greek philosophy type superstitions out there, and Plato is actually recorded saying a lot about this, is that souls that were too heavy to go to the afterlife would be apparitions. And so in their minds, this was possibly some sort of apparition. I don't think that the translation to ghost is quite right, but they thought this is a dead person that is walking toward us, or some sort of monster. Because the second belief that we have to kind of numb in this case is what we know about water. Now, on our phones right now, we could look up videos and pictures, and maybe you've taken some on a vacation, of what it looks like under the water. We know about whales, we know about sharks, we know about fish, we know about reefs, all that we learned from Finding Nemo. But we still know a lot of real stuff about the water. We go on vacations and to just get into the water. We let our kids and our pets and ourselves get into bodies of water. But they didn't know much about the bodies of water at that time. Thousands of years ago, they didn't know much. It was very mysterious. Even though the water was much clearer than it is now and they could see a lot more, it was a very mysterious and dangerous idea. So fishermen and people that would be traveling, they would be under high alert. It wouldn't be this, let's go have fun in the lake. It would be stay in the shallow end. They are out there exhausted. They are tired. They have reached their threshold. They're seeing an apparition or something on the water that some of them probably thought they were hallucinating. And they're also in the dark, and they're on a body of water that they believe to be completely a mystery and dangerous. They have reached their threshold of fear. But verse 27, if you can go to that, Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid." Now keep that up there. Jesus gives them something to do. He gives them something to know, and he tells them something to stop in a very succinct way. Something to do. He says, take courage. something to know. He says, it's me. It's not a ghost. It's not an apparition. It's me, Jesus. And 3, he gives them something to stop. He says, don't be afraid, or we could even phrase it to say it this way. Fear not. I'm with you. And our final observation today is just really what we've been leading up to. If any of you are familiar with the story, you heard Kurt read it a minute ago, we're getting to Peter and what Peter did. And I'm just going to tell you that through my readings, I have pretty warm feelings towards Peter. I've talked to a lot of people that love to bash Peter for this, to see this as like an ultimate failure, immaturity, or being brash. But I'm going to give you my observation about this, and you can disagree if you want, totally up to you. But here's observation number 3. Peter shows faith. Peter shows faith here. Now, first off, Peter was part of the group that was freaking out. He hasn't been taking a nap this whole time. He's been on the boat. He's seen this. He's got more belief about what water does since he's been a lifetime fisherman. He knows the dangers of this. I can even conjecture to say that he knows people who have drowned before because of all the life that he's lived out there on the water or by the water. Second, Peter asks for something that Jesus wasn't offering. None of the other disciples said right away, hey, Jesus, that's great, it's you. Can I come stroll on the water with you? But Peter, for some reason, in that moment, different than everybody else on the boat, Jesus didn't just say, come out here. But Peter uses that moment to say, if it's you, God, he's not even sure. If it's you, Jesus, if it's you, call me out on the water with you. Why would Peter do that? If you've read the narrative of Scripture, if you're familiar with what Jesus has said over and over again to the people who have heard his teachings, what does he say? He says, follow me. I believe that Peter is the only one of the followers of Jesus who took seriously what he said. That when Jesus said to Peter months before, maybe years before this, follow me. And Peter said, yes, I'll follow you. That he never forgot that. That when a rabbi says, follow me, they're saying, I believe that you could do everything I can do. And that Peter was the only one in that moment, as he's tired, as he's scared, as he's stressed, as people are flipping out around him, that even just the chance that it could be Jesus, he says, Jesus, if it's you, and you've called me to follow you, call me out on the water with you. And Jesus just gives him a one-word answer. He says, come. Peter was the only follower who took Jesus seriously. But then we got verse 28 and 29. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, Jesus said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. I wish I was like that. I wish that in the moments that I know God is calling me to say something, to do something, that I don't even need full assurance, just the assurance that if it's you, God, I can do it. That if you're with me, God, this is possible. This should really blow our minds. This moment should blow our minds. We can read the Bible and it can be like, I've heard this story before. That's right, Jesus and miracles and he's God. But Peter is a person. He's an uneducated, didn't go to school, fisherman his whole life, blue-collar guy. No one expects him to do great things in that culture. For something changed when Jesus said, follow me, that Peter said, this is the way. This is the way that I can go. And some of us, it blows our minds because Peter's saying, if it's you, God. What if we live that way? What if the way I live was, God, if it's you, call me wherever you want. I'll go. If it's you, God, I'll leave my comforts and safety and I'll follow. God, if it's you, I'll take a financial risk. God, if it's you, I will make this change in my life. God, if it's you, I will do something hard, even though I don't want to do it, even though I've never seen anybody else do it. Because it's not like there was water walking classes that Jesus had them in. This is the first time. And here he is saying, God, if it's you, I'll follow. Jesus said, come. Peter got out of the boat. And this also should blow our minds, right? Jesus did not calm the storm until later, right? We see that when we read that earlier. Jesus calmed the storm later, but Peter got out of the boat into the storm. Peter's entire focus changed, though, because he knew Jesus was with him. But that only lasted a little bit. We don't know how far or how fast he walked. We know he was walking toward Jesus. Jesus was walking towards them. The gap was closing. But we do know that that stroll was short-lived. We'll read the rest of the text here in verse 30 to 33. But when Peter saw the wind, right, with his eyes, he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink. Beginning to sink, he cried out again. So crying out in fear. Matthew's going to use that same word to connect it, that he went right back to the same way he was responding before. Lord, save me. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? And it ends with, and when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down, and then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly you are the Son of God. Before we talk more about Peter, I think it's a little ironic for us in our eyes when we see this. We're like, these disciples, it took this moment for them to say, all right, you're God. That's right. I mean, they've seen like blind people given sight. They've seen the lame walk 24 hours before, maybe less. Like they saw Jesus feed 5,000 people, but it was this moment in their fear that getting out of their comfort zone, seeing the way that Jesus conquered this fear is what came to them. Sometimes it's not the blessings and the benefits that God gives us. It's him being with us in a storm. I think some of the most solid faith people I know, they wouldn't say that they have a built trust in Jesus because of all the easy times, but because of the way God's been with them in the storm. Back to Peter, though. Peter was having this sweet stroll on the water, and then he takes his eyes off of Jesus, puts them back on the storm. Most of my prayers and my adventures in following Jesus have been a lot like that. God, I trust you, but I'd like you to calm the storm before I follow you. God, I trust you. I have no doubts in you, but could you make it a little easier before I take that step towards what you're calling me to? Before I make that call, before I say that word, before I take that risk? God, I'll do it. I just need some more time, right? I got a few things I want to take care of. Don't forget about me. Thank you. God, I see the problem. I just need you to make it easier for me. Friends, I believe that the number one reason that we don't follow Jesus is that we're waiting for him to calm the storms before we follow. But he wants us to have the faith to follow him through the storm. I want to say that again. I think we got it on the screen. The number one reason that we don't follow Jesus is we are waiting for him to calm the storms before we follow. But he wants us to have faith to follow him through the storm. The pains, the responsibilities, and the things we can't control, my busy schedule, my packed budget. And if you don't believe in Jesus, or you just need to hear this another way today, the number one reason that we don't get out of our comfort zones is because we want everything to be calm and easy before we take that step out. But truth be told, the things that form us and the growth that's waiting for us is outside of the boat, outside of our comfort zones. We introduced this pattern of fear the first week. It starts with our beliefs. It goes to our triggers, the things that trigger us to fear. Then it goes to our reactions and shame and isolation. That most often fear leads us to isolation. That being afraid, when I'm afraid, it leads to me feeling ashamed, which leads me to not want anyone to know about it. And so I want to be by myself. So let's start at the beginning. Peter believed what Jesus said about, if I follow you, I can do the things you believe. I can do the things that you do. Peter was triggered by the mystery and the danger of the storm. He knew a lot about water. He knew a lot about storms. And he also held the superstition about ghosts. However, because of his beliefs about Jesus, he was able to get out of the boat. He was able to see through the storm and see the hope that was in the storm. The fear was conquered by that. The fear was still there. He was still scared. But what happened? Another belief came up. Not just his belief in Jesus, but he saw the wind, he saw the storm, and that belief triggered fear, which led him to sink. You see, so often we think that our fears and our isolation are based upon what is causing fear, but it's actually about our beliefs. It goes back to what we truly believe. Something changed. Peter's other beliefs showed up. Peter was then confronted by some other beliefs. We've got that. But Jesus caught him. And similar to the story, I don't know if you remember this when we talked about Adam and Eve, and how when Eve ate that apple, Adam was right there with him. He wasn't somewhere else. He wasn't watching a game or like tilling the garden, working. I was working. I didn't know, right? Adam was right there when Eve ate that fruit. And Adam offered no support. All that is recorded is that Adam blamed her. That later on, the only thing Adam would say to Eve or about Eve about that moment was, "She made me do it." That in a moment where she could have used his courage, he abandoned her. He did what a lot of us do, not just men, right? But a lot of us do in moments when we're scared, when we're fearful, blame. But Jesus, sometimes referred to as the new Adam in the New Testament, Jesus is right there in Peter's fearful failure. And when he picks Peter up, he doesn't shame him. Now, it might look like that. What does he say? He says, "You of little faith." That's a really popular saying, right? You who have a little faith. But actually, it's a horrible translation to the English. That the word there in Greek is actually a compound word. I'm not going to try and say it. I should have practiced it more. But it's a compound word that means little or small and faith. And that actually what scholars believe Jesus was doing there, he wasn't belittling him. "Oh, Peter, you of little faith," right? Like we want to say to our kids sometimes, "You of little time, you of little responsibility." But actually, Jesus was giving him a bit of a nickname there, more of a pet name. He just called him little faith. That he picked him up out of the water as he's screaming for help, and he called him little faith. Didn't shame him. Didn't say, "Come on, Peter, like learn to swim if you can't trust me better." And it kind of makes sense that Jesus would not have an issue with calling someone little faith. That actually would be a compliment. Because later on in Matthew chapter 17, he's talking to them about faith, and he says this, "Truly, I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you." Jesus showed again how God responds when we slip up. You know what often keeps us in the boat from taking risk is what if I fail? What if I don't make it the first time? I work at a gym where we teach kids like parkour and ninja type stuff. And the kids that struggle the most are the ones that expect everything to come on the first try. That the first time I try and do this front flip that I've never done before, I'm going to nail it, and they're going to give me a trophy, and parents will buy me ice cream afterwards. But actually, it's going to take hundreds of tries to get to a place where your body and your muscles and your mind and the equipment are working together to where you can master this. But that I think what happened for Peter that day, what changed in Peter is realizing, if I say, give God my yes, no matter what happens, he's with me. And I think that changes it for all of us too. That when I'm scared, I know God's calling me to do this. I know God's calling me to up this in my life, or God's calling me to distance from something. I don't have to worry if I believe he's with me. Most of us do not struggle with wanting to grow. We struggle with the fear of what will happen if we stumble. I'm going to say it a different way. Most of you do not struggle with wanting to grow. You struggle with the fear of what will happen if you stumble. Today, I want to challenge you to identify your boat and step out of it. So I'm just going to list a few metaphorical boats for us. The first one is the financial boat. And you could be in a financial metaphorical boat because you literally bought a physical boat, but no judgment there on why you got there. God's calling you to be generous, to give more, but you're waiting until you have more margin. Money talk triggers you. That could be a trigger, just me talking about money here. That's a real thing. That's a legitimate thing. But it goes back to what we believe. That money talk can lead to worry, it can lead to stress, it can lead to anxiety, it can lead to hopelessness or despair. But if God is calling you, and I mean this, if God's calling you to be more generous or kind with what you have, maybe to a nonprofit, to individuals, or even to yourself, right? You can trust him. And if there's a failure, if there's a stumble, he's with you. That's a financial boat. Then there's, of course, a relational boat that you can be in. No one is fully confident with people. All right, so I'm in a bracket that many would call an extrovert, where I am very energized by interacting with people. I care about like mundane details about your life. And I just love to hear you talk about them. I get energy from other people connecting too. If I see people that I care about are connecting with each other, or that just I have people in my life that are not lonely, I love that. Like I would do anything for that, for the people I care about. But can I just be real with you? God calls all of us to get out of that relational boat, to take risks. God calls all of us to do that. Now, in different ways, but sometimes we can kind of give this excuse of like, well, God's going to call like Jared to do that because like he seems to like that stuff. Here's where that belief goes wrong. Believing that someone who is like really gifted or really excited about like social things has it easy is like saying someone with more money never has worries about money. Just because maybe my gifting or my passion isn't in that relationship area doesn't mean that I don't have what God needs. In fact, what I used to tell people when I was in charge of like the greeting group, we had like 200 people that were part of our like group that they would greet outside of church. And I've worked with like businesses before, and I'll have people that are considered like, they consider themselves introverts or really shy. And they'll say, nobody wants me out there. And what I've said is actually half the population is just like you and are super weirded out by me. Thank you. Super weirded out by me. And they need someone who sees them. And that's why God might just be sending you just the way you are. And guess what? He's not just sending you. He's going with you. If God is calling you out of that relational comfort zone, you can trust him. And then I'll end with this one. It's a spiritual boat. And the spiritual boat, you can go really general, especially in this part of Colorado with the spiritual boat. But when we go through seasons in our life, sometimes there are seasons where like prayer just comes natural. Attending church just comes very natural. And then there's seasons of our life where it doesn't. There's things that are happening everywhere else that we all of a sudden feel like that kid a month after they went to church camp and they made all these commitments like, I'm going to pray and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And they're like, oh crap, I haven't done, what were my commitments again? I got to remember them. And we start to feel that shame, like when Peter was sinking in the water. That's very normal to have that happen. That happens in relationships, that happens in everything. Now, you might need to look into joining like an upcoming spiritual retreat maybe. Maybe you need to look into having like goals when it comes to like Bible reading or prayer or church attendance where you involve other people or involve like an incentive for yourself. Like for us when I was a kid, when I started to not like go to church because I was always sick on Sundays, right? It was when my age ended with teen, and I was always sick on Sundays, and my family started going out for lunch after church every Sunday. And they would get home, at like 2:30, and I'd be like, I'm starving. And they're like, should have gone to church with us, you know? But I think that was an incentive for them too, because they were dealing with a pretty rebellious teenager and needed to reward themselves for still getting up and just getting out of that spiritual boat. So I want to ask you to respond today. Guys, you all have done so well. I know this is a bit of a longer one. I want you to grab a Connect card, and we're going to put those spiritual boats back up on the screen, or those boats back up on the screen. And what I want you to do is I want you to write one of those on your Connect card so I can pray for you. And this is just kind of like a first little baby step out of that boat. It's just identifying it. Now, these are just 3 that literally your mind could be filled right now with a bunch. I just want you to write one, okay? It can be anything. I don't want to like tell it for you. I'm not up here trying to like, oh, if I can just list off 15 different examples and maybe one will hit. I think we all know the area that brings fear into our lives because we face it every single week, or we avoid it every single week. But if God is calling us out of that comfort zone, out of that boat, then it's for something beautiful. Now, sometimes we wonder, why does this even matter? Why does it even matter that I get out of a comfort zone? Illustration I've got for that is that there's this beauty in we can start by being a walker and end as a tour guide. And here's what I mean. We live on the Ralston Creek Trail. So there's people going by our house, bikers wearing spandex, super serious, you know, looking down with like the mirror on their helmet and stuff like that all day long. People biking, people walking. We live right on it. It's 13 point something miles. And when my family and I first moved to this area, we didn't know that trail very well. There were different places where it was like, oh, do we cross the street here? I don't see a sign. Do we go on this dirt path? Is it going to come back around to the paved trail? I wouldn't say we were lost. It's a pretty simple, like urban trail. But we didn't know it. Where now, we went on a night ride. We've done these a couple times where we all have like lights on our bikes and stuff with like 4 other like households. We did a night ride and my kids are just leading the way, right? They're like, oh, like there's another kid. They all gave their lights so like other kids don't need it. Because when we first start getting out of our comfort zone, we're just kind of taking a walk. We're kind of trying to figure out the footing. We're trying to figure out the speed. We're trying to figure out, is this even something? God, are you with me? We have all these questions. But what ends up happening when we start walking a path multiple days, multiple times, when we start building that, we know that failure can still occur. We could still get lost on that trail. But what happens when we get so good at getting out of our comfort zone is we're not just walkers anymore. We become tour guides for other people. That what ends up happening is you don't have to be a guru, but you can just be someone who sees someone else, loves them enough to say, you can walk with me. You can ride in the dark with me. It is so much fun.